hey, we're going to have to start over. Something weird happened there. I'm really not even sure what happened. But Book 57, Week 57, we have a classic, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It's published in 1866 in serial form. And the way that a serial form publication works is you have to include sort of teasers or cliffhangers or sort of, give people a reason to buy the next edition, because that's exactly the whole point of what you're trying to do, is to get people to buy the next edition. And this was published in 12 installments over the course of a year. It's made up of six parts. Each part is, just shy of 100 pages, maybe like 90 pages. So each installment was half a part, about 45 to 50 pages or so. And this is what was published each month. And so every 30 or 40 pages, there is something of a cliffhanger in the story, a sort of, pushing forward. Now, there are two aspects of this that matter. One is that means that we have to start with action to begin with. We can't just start with long descriptive passages alone. We can start that way, but within 30 or 40 pages, we've got to get something going on plot wise that's going to interest people. And the other side of that is you have to write to your page limit. So let's say that you could have finished this particular bit in 30 pages, but you need to get 45. So there may or may not be 45 pages of padding. Excuse me, 15 pages of padding to bring your 30 pages up to 45. So it's a blessing and also a curse. On the one hand, you do know that every 30 to 45 pages or so, you will get some kind of story point, some kind of plot beat that will keep you reading. On the other hand, it is possible that there could be some overwriting and some lengthy speeches. And well, this is my third time reading Crime and Punishment, and I stalled the first two times. And the reason why I stalled is there is, in my opinion, a bit of what might be called padding. Now, don't get me wrong. This is a absolutely great novel by a great novelist. This is one of, and deservedly so, one of the most celebrated 19th century novels, one of the most celebrated Russian novels in history. And that is absolutely deserved. So, and I'm talking about, quote, padding and that kind of thing. There are discussions here. Okay, so what the story's about is this, and you'll have to forgive Russian pronunciations here. Raskolnikov, a young student in Petersburg. He was a law student, and he has fallen off from doing his law studies through a combination of factors, I believe. Now, the one that Dostoevsky straightforwardly does demonstrate, well, demonstrates two of these actually. He demonstrates his extreme poverty. So he's not getting proper nutrition. He's not getting a proper um, social situation, and so he's not eating well. He is not necessarily sleeping well. He can't keep himself clean. Um, he's living in extreme poverty. That's the one thing. And the other thing is kind of this ideology of the great man, like Napoleon, who violated the law and made the law into his own. And this kind of great man of history influenced Raskolnikov to think that a great man of history can violate the law and makes the law his own. So the great man is not beholden to the social law that other people are held to, or even the political law that people are held to. They make their own way, and they fearlessly do what is necessary. And so this combination, I believe that we're well before the time period of analyzing somebody and giving and saying they have depression and that kind of thing. But I think that he does have depression, some grandiose ideologies, clearly some narcissism, some self-involvement. I mean, people come to him and talk with him about their problems, and he just tells them to get away. I don't want to hear about it as the book progresses. So I think there are some ways that we could analyze him psychologically from a current point of view that Dostoevsky didn't have access to. But that doesn't mean he wasn't aware of some of the psychological issues. Now, for those who don't know, Dostoevsky started out as just a traditional novelist, and He wrote a couple of novels that were pretty well celebrated as a young man, and then he found himself involved in some political radicals. Now, I'm not sure that Dostoevsky himself ever really took up those radical politics, but he was associated with these groups who had those radical politics. And all of these radicals, including him, were rounded up and put on a firing line, and they were all going to be shot. And then this is some sort of big, sort of psychological trick, I don't know. But instead of shooting them, they sent them to Siberia. And so Dostoevsky was scarred for life by this, by the existential kind of threat to life, how fragile life is, and what life is about. And so that becomes a major thematic point that his books are about. So in this case, we have this young student, former student, Raskolnikov. He's dropped out of school because he can't afford it. He doesn't want to do people's lessons anymore. And Raskolnikov has gotten this idea fixe, this idea in his head that he needs to go and do a great deed. And the great deed that he settles on is there's a pawnbroker that he believes is basically a leech on society. She is taking pledges, gold, silver, precious items from the poor and giving them a pittance of a couple of dollars. They're called kopecks and rubles. Kopecks are kind of like their pennies, and rubles are the dollars. So she's giving them just a couple of rubles or even just kopecks for these. For these items, less than their worth, but these are desperate people who have nowhere to go. And so he's and charging exorbitant interest on this, so that these pledges are hard for these people to get back. They have to keep coming in and paying on the interest to keep her from selling the item or owning the item outright, and this kind of thing. And he decides that he is going to take his revenge on society and prove he's a great man by killing this woman and then taking that money and doing good things for it. So he goes to her house eventually, and he does a dry run and confirms his desire to do this. And then he gets a lucky break in his mind. Is he learned that her sister is going to be out, so she will be alone on a particular time, particular date. And he goes to the house that particular time, that particular date, and he goes through with his plan. He we get the elaborate description of how he takes an axe, how he hangs it in a loop in his coat, and this kind of thing. And he goes and he does exactly what he says he's going to do, and he kills her with his axe. And then he tries to steal her stuff, but he can't get into the strong box where her goods are, and he starts to have um, psychological regrets, I guess, psychological issues. I don't really know exactly how to describe it. He starts to not be in his right mind as this is happening. And as he's doing this, as he's searching through her drawers, he hears a noise in the room where he left the now murdered woman, and he goes in there, and his sister is there. And because he fears discovery, he has no choice, he feels, but kill the woman. And this is the first step where we see that Dostoevsky is aware that his grandiose ideology is suspect. Because, okay, whether or not we believe that this pawnbroker was a leech on society, his sister is depicted throughout as a very good woman, as a simple, upstanding woman who helps people. So him killing her for self-preservation kind of puts into question his entire grandiose ideology to begin with. Okay, so he steals some of her stuff. He can't find the real valuable stuff, but he steals some stuff, and he's about to leave, but he can't get out because some people are coming up the stairs. So the door's been open the whole time, by the way. He's so unaware of what he's doing that he just basically just left this door wide open. Anybody walking by could have seen this murdered woman, at least two murdered women, actually. Uh, but he figures this out, and he closes the door, locks the door, and somebody comes to the door, uh, basically to try to pawn something, and another guy comes because he's going to buy some of the pawned material. And um, they realize that the door is locked from the inside, so someone must be home. And they also realize that one of them had an appointment, so she has to be home, and something must therefore be wrong. So they send one of them off to get the porter, while the other one stands outside the door. And Raskolnikov is standing here on the other side of the door. He's just murdered two women. He's got nowhere to go. He's clearly the murderer. He's going to get caught. And okay, within like the first 100 pages, the novel's over, right? Because he's caught, and then etc. But no, the second guy stupidly wanders away to find what happened to the first guy. Raskolnikov takes the opportunity to run out the door. And through a series of circumstances involving some painters in the third floor below him, this is happening on the fourth floor, he gets away completely unseen. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows that he was there at all. He gets away completely scot free. Um, and then he starts to have real psychological issues with believing that other people know and this kind of thing. And he has various conversations with his friend Rasmussen. I can't pronounce his name. I'm going to go with Rasmussen, even though it's wrong, but that's what I'm going to go with because I can't pronounce this name. And then his mother and his sister and his sister's fiance, all these people start invading his space and coming into his space, and all he wants is to be left alone now because he's so psychologically in just a weird space. And that's what the middle bit of this novel is about, is his kind of growing somewhat paranoia. He gets ill, and also just the psychological effects of having committed this crime. Bear in mind that Raskolnikov is not a criminal. He is not a bad person. He is a morally good person who has done a reprehensible thing. And that is the conflict that Dostoevsky wants to look at here. And we know about his grandiose ideology because about 2 months before this happened, an essay that he had written, his first publication, had come out dealing with him claiming that there are two kinds of people in this world, the great and the normal, or the mediocre. And, well, by doing this act, one could claim he is trying to be part of the great. But this is just straight hubris, right? This is grandiosity. And the police investigator calls him on this because when does a police investigator believe that Raskolnikov did this or was involved in some kind of way? It's hard to say exactly because, as it turns out, when he was getting away, one of the things that he did was he hid in the room the painters were painting when the painters weren't there. And while he was there, he fidgeted, I guess, and dropped one of the pledges. And one of the painters comes in, finds this pledge, goes and takes it to a different pawnbroker, sells it, and drinks up the money. And, well, so he gets caught, and the painter actually eventually gets so scared because he doesn't know what he did when he was drunk and claims that he did it. And so he's going to go down for this, except for, you know. Anyway, things continue. Um, Raskolnikov falls in love with this woman who has sold herself into prostitution to save her family. So she's got what's called a yellow card, and this is a I don't really know much about Russian law at the time, but this is kind of like a legal prostitution. I guess she's paying taxes or paying a something to the police or to the state to justify being able to do this, or she's deemed clean or something. I don't really know what the yellow card does, but the yellow card allows her to do this. But it's a sign of disrespect at the same time because she is now, of course, by the ideology of the time, something of a fallen woman because of this. But she's not done this because again, she's not a bad person. Sonia or Sophia does not do this because she's a bad person. She's doing this because she has no choice. She has to save her family, and this is all that's available to her. And the reason why she has to save her family is because her dad, who has a good government job, is a terrible drunk and loses his job through drink, spends all of his paycheck, spends his bonus, spends all of the money she gives her family. And so her stepmom, who is dying of tuberculosis, and the three kids are all dressed in rags. And so Sonia feels she has no choice but to do this in order to provide something. So why does all that matter? Because Raskolnikov befriends this drunk at a pub, and shortly after the murder, takes place, this drunk is run over by a horse carriage, and Raskolnikov gives that family all the money that his sister and mother had gotten. Now, the money his sister and mother had gotten, they got by difficult means of basically pledging against the only money that they have. And his sister is about to be married to a bit of an ass, actually, in order to save the family. Again, the idea that women are giving themselves for family is something that happens a lot in this book. And so that's going on. Rasmussen falls in love with her, and anyway, so all these things are going on, and Raskolnikov at the same time is trying to, psychologically recover from what he had done, and he has a problem doing this. And eventually he confesses to Sonia, and well, he gets caught. She tells him to go to the police and turn himself in and go to Siberia, and that's exactly what he does. Then he goes to Siberia at the end, and she goes with him because that's the other thing about the Siberian situation is when you go to Siberia, you're not provided with anything. I think you get like the most disgusting food available, but your family has to pay for your keep, and so that's what Sonia does. Is she gets an inheritance of sorts, and she goes and helps pay for Raskolnikov, and that's how the novel ends. So I've skipped an awful lot, but this is a very interesting book. It's not it's not the examination of a hardened criminal. Raskolnikov is not a hardened criminal. It's the examination of a good person who has done a bad thing. And so, what happens when this person who wants to be moral, who thinks that they have done a bad thing for a moral end, and it, and it's a huge critique of this whole sort of grand people of history kind of approach, because there is no justification in the novel for taking the law into your own hands and deciding that this woman is worth killing, that she's a leech on society. This is never supported, and and the justice system is what it is. It's a very interesting book. I don't have time to do it the psychology justice here, but that's basically what the book is about, and that's where I was talking about the padding. There are these very long conversations between Dostoevsky and the police, and do they need to be this long? You know, I don't know. They make very long speeches to each other about, this great man theory and whatnot. So definitely worth reading. Definitely deservedly a classic. It shouldn't have taken me so long to read it, but I don't necessarily do well sometimes with these books that have these long, drawn out, moralistic passages. Whether I agree or disagree with what's being said, they sometimes bore me, and unfortunately, that's what happened here. But that's not the fault of the novel. Part of the problem is I've read so many other authors since Dostoevsky, some of who have been inspired by the kinds of links that Dostoevsky went to with psychology, that this is kind of dipping back into an early period of some things I'm already familiar with. And that's part of why it's difficult for me. It's also difficult because Russian novels are difficult. Um, this is the third Dostoevsky novel I've read. The other ones I've read Brothers Karamazov. That's his last novel, and often considered his masterpiece. Between this one and that one, for his masterpiece. And then he wrote, I think, two or three other celebrated novels in this mature period. And I've read one of the other ones. I think it was called Demons, but I'm not positive. And it dealt more directly with political radicals. That was the first one I read. And, not, excuse me, Anna Karenina was, Anna Karenina, that's Tolstoy. Um, Brothers Karamazov was the first one I read. I read that one back in North Carolina years ago. And then I read Demons about 3 years ago. I don't remember anything about it. And then I've read this one. So, all right. Dostoevsky, week 57. Have a good one.